They said the old nurse's station was empty. But when the janitor looked up, a pale woman in a blood-soaked gown was standing in the hallway. Her eyes were hollow, her mouth opened, wide, too wide, and the lights exploded one by one, chasing him down the corridor. Welcome to Ohio's most haunted hospitals. These are places where the sick never truly left, where screams still echo through long abandoned wards, and where the dead refuse to rest. Before we begin, I want you to do something for me. Look at the clock. What time is it where you're watching this? Is it late at night? Are you sitting alone in the dark? Or are you keeping the lights on just in case? Tell me in the comments, because I promise you this. No matter what time it is, no matter where you are, the stories you're about to hear will follow you. Tonight we are not tourists. We are not here for history lessons. We are witnesses. We are about to walk together through 5 of the most terrifying hospitals in the state of Ohio. Each one holds a legacy of suffering, madness, and encounters so chilling, you will feel them in your bones. You will hear the footsteps that echo down the corridors. You will feel the weight of eyes watching you from behind the glass. And when this video ends, the silence in your own room may not feel the same. It may feel heavier. It may feel like something came back with you. So take a deep breath, make sure your doors are locked, and if you're brave enough, let's begin. The year was 1874. Rising above the hills of Athens, Ohio, a massive red-bricked Gothic structure opened its doors, the Athens Lunatic Asylum, later known as the Ridges. It was meant to be a place of healing, a sanctuary for those suffering in silence. Instead, it became a warehouse of pain. Inside, men and women were locked away for everything from schizophrenia to epilepsy, from depression to simple alcoholism. Some were committed for reasons as small as disobedience or inconvenience. Families left their loved ones behind, and for many, those walls became a lifetime sentence. The treatments inside were cruel. Hydrotherapy left patients shivering in freezing water for hours. Electroshock silenced screams only to bring them back the next day. Lobotomies carved away personalities, leaving behind empty shells. What was called medicine was often little more than torture dressed in white coats. Over time, more than 1,900 patients died within those walls. They were buried on the grounds in unmarked graves, forgotten by their families, forgotten by history, but not forgotten here. Some of those spirits still walk the halls, searching for recognition, for release. The most infamous story is Margaret Schilling. In 1979, she disappeared inside the asylum. For weeks, no one could find her. Then, in a locked and abandoned ward, they discovered her decomposed body on the floor. But when they removed her, something horrifying remained. A dark outline of her body permanently stained into the concrete, arms outstretched, face twisted in agony. The stain has never faded. Even after decades of cleaning, it remains, as if the building itself refuses to let her go. Visitors swear they see her figure pacing the room, her shadow moving even when the lights are still. But Margaret is not alone. Whispers drift through the corridors. Dozens of voices at once, some laughing, some weeping, some whispering your name. Visitors have followed the sound only to find empty rooms. Some claim the whispers follow them home. Others have seen the patient in white, a woman in a hospital gown gliding silently down the hall. Paranormal investigators once caught her on camera. When they called to her, she turned, her face pale and hollow, and disappeared straight through the wall. Students from Ohio University, which now owns much of the property, say they see faces pressed against the windows at night. Gaunt, hollow-eyed faces staring out, mouths opening and closing as though gasping for air. But when they rush to the windows, the glass reflects only their own frightened faces. Then there is the shadow surgeon. Security guards describe a tall, thin figure in a doctor's coat moving through the basement halls, where rusting medical tools still remain. They hear surgical instruments clattering onto trays, though no one is there. One guard swore he felt a freezing hand grip his shoulder, and when he spun around, the only sign of life was the sound of a scalpel dropping to the floor. The air inside the Ridges is heavy. It clings to your lungs. Every step echoes like it doesn't belong to you. The deeper you go, the more you feel as if the walls themselves are alive, closing in. The Athens Lunatic Asylum is not only haunted by the dead, it is haunted by the madness that was forced upon them. Madness that still lingers, waiting to consume anyone who dares to walk its halls after dark. And yet, as terrifying as the Ridges is, it is only the beginning. Ohio hides hospitals even more cursed. Places where children cried out for their mothers, where operating rooms became torture chambers, where the walls themselves seemed to bleed. The next stop on our journey is one of the most feared hospitals in the state. A place so disturbing that even experienced ghost hunters refuse to remain there after midnight. What waits in those halls makes the Ridges look merciful. The Ridges was only the first shadow on our path. But there are other places in Ohio where the sick never left, where spirits cling to the walls, and where the air itself feels cursed. Our next stop takes us north, into the heart of Cleveland, a city known for its steel, its grit, its working-class spirit. But behind the noise of the factories and the hum of the streets lies something older, something darker. This is the story of St. Vincent Charity Hospital, a place where healing was promised, but where whispers of the dead echo through the corridors long after the patients are gone. St. Vincent was founded in the 1860s by the Sisters of Charity. It was a beacon of hope, a Catholic hospital built to care for Cleveland's poor and sick. Over the years, its reputation grew. People came to be healed, but not all of them left alive. Hundreds of deaths filled its history. Some were natural, some were violent, and some defy explanation. Because the deeper you go into the hospital's past, the more you realize the walls remember. And sometimes they do not forgive. Let's step inside. The first stories come from the old psychiatric wing. Long ago, patients were kept here for treatment. But treatment in the early 20th century was cruel. Doctors tried experimental drugs, electric shock, and isolation. Cries of pain filled the ward, but the city never heard them. Today, that wing is closed. But at night, the windows glow faintly, as though the lights are still on inside. One night, a nurse walking past swore she saw figures moving behind the glass. When she called security, they searched the wing. Every door was locked. Every room was empty. Yet the lights continued to flicker on and off. Another tale belongs to the old children's ward. Hospitals for children are always heavy with grief, and this one is no exception. Staff whisper about a little boy who wanders the hall in striped pajamas. He appears by the nurse's desk, clutching a stuffed toy. When someone approaches, he runs giggling down the hallway and vanishes into the wall. More than one nurse has left that ward in tears, unable to explain the sound of tiny footsteps running across the tiles when no one is there. Then there is the story of the operating room on the lower floor. Doctors and interns once trained here, performing countless surgeries, some successful, others ending in tragedy. Over time, legends grew of a surgeon who refused to leave. Staff call him the man with the mask. He appears in surgical scrubs, his face hidden by a mask, his hands red as though freshly washed in blood. Witnesses say he steps out of the shadows near the old OR, stares silently for a moment, and then fades away. One doctor swore that during a late-night shift, he felt a cold breeze sweep through the hall. When he turned, a figure in green scrubs stood at the end of the corridor. As he walked closer, the figure raised its hand, and the overhead lights snapped off in a wave, one by one, until the hallway was pitch black. When the lights returned, the corridor was empty. And then there are the elevators. Staff avoid using them at night. More than once, people have reported the elevator doors opening on their own, revealing an empty car. Others say the elevator takes them to floors that no longer exist. One nurse told of pressing the button for the lobby, only for the elevator to descend into darkness. When the doors opened, she found herself in a hallway she didn't recognize, lined with rusting wheelchairs and beds. She swore she heard voices calling her name from the shadows. She pressed the button again and found herself back in the lobby, shaking, pale, and unable to explain what had just happened. But perhaps the most disturbing story comes from the chapel. Hospitals often have chapels for prayer, for peace. Yet staff say the St. Vincent Chapel feels different, heavy, oppressive. Visitors describe kneeling to pray only to feel someone breathing behind them. A few say they've heard confessions whispered into their ears, hollow, broken voices begging for forgiveness. When they turn around, the pews are empty. What makes St. Vincent so terrifying is not just the number of stories, but the variety: spirits of patients, shadows of surgeons, echoes of children, and the sense that death lingers in every wing, waiting for the living to stumble close enough to notice. Now imagine this. You're walking the quiet halls at midnight. The air is still. The fluorescent lights hum softly. Then, without warning, the hum cuts out. The hallway plunges into silence. The lights above you flicker. You hear footsteps approaching, but the corridor is empty. And just as you start to move, the elevator behind you dings. The doors open. No one is inside. Would you dare step in? Because some who did never returned to the floor they left. And if St. Vincent's halls chilled you, prepare yourself. Because Ohio has another hospital where death was constant, where cruelty was routine, and where spirits lash out with fury. Our next stop is a place so soaked in suffering that even in daylight, it feels like night never ends. Some hospitals were built to heal, others were built to contain. And then there are places like the Lima State Hospital for the criminally insane, where walls were not only meant to keep the dangerous inside, but where cruelty itself became part of the architecture. The year was 1912 when construction began. A massive fortress of concrete and stone, Lima was designed to house Ohio's most dangerous patients: murderers, violent criminals, and the deeply disturbed. When it opened in 1915, the press hailed it as state-of-the-art. But the truth was far darker. Inside those walls, more than 1,500 patients lived in overcrowded conditions. Guards kept strict control, and punishment was swift. Accounts of abuse were whispered: beatings, starvation, even experimental treatments that left men broken. For decades, Lima was a place where cruelty was routine, where cries of pain echoed down the stone corridors, but never left the property. The building closed in the 1980s. But its reputation lives on, not just as a prison, not just as a hospital, but as one of the most haunted sites in the state of Ohio. One of the most common stories is of the crying man in the cells. Visitors who tour the abandoned wings say they hear weeping echoing from the solitary cells. Sometimes it's a soft sob, other times it rises into guttural wails of despair. Yet when the doors are opened, the cells are empty. Some have reported walking away only to hear the sound of chains dragging behind them, as if someone unseen is following, shackled and desperate. Then there is the tale of the red-eyed figure. Guards long ago whispered about a shadowy shape that prowled the cell blocks after dark. It wasn't a patient, it wasn't human. A hulking silhouette with glowing red eyes that flicker in the dark like embers. Several guards refused to work night shifts alone because of it. Paranormal investigators claim to have captured photos of two glowing orbs floating in the darkness, always at the height of a man's eyes, always staring back. Another terrifying encounter is known as the Screaming Hallway, a long, narrow corridor where, for reasons no one understands, sound carries unnaturally. Explorers say that when they walk it, they begin to hear whispers, sometimes in their own voice. The whispers build until they explode into a blood-curdling scream that seems to come from everywhere at once. One man who experienced it collapsed, clutching his ears, convinced that something inside the hospital was trying to drive him insane. The Phantom Guard is another recurring figure. Dressed in an old uniform, he is seen patrolling the halls, jangling a ring of keys. Witnesses say he doesn't look ghostly. He looks solid, real, until he vanishes right in front of them. Some believe he was a guard who died violently, perhaps at the hands of an inmate, and is now doomed to walk his eternal shift forever. And perhaps the most disturbing story is the massive shadows in the chapel. The chapel at Lima was supposed to be a place of peace, where inmates could seek forgiveness, but instead it has become one of the most active areas in the building. People who step inside describe the air growing heavy, thick, almost impossible to breathe. The temperature drops sharply, and then the shadows come. Dozens of them crawling across the walls, gathering together into a writhing mass that seems to swallow the light. Some say they hear chanting. Others swear the shadows reach for them, stretching unnaturally, trying to pull them into the darkness. Few stay long in that room. The building itself feels like a trap. Its concrete walls are cold, unforgiving. Every hallway looks the same, stretching endlessly, designed to disorient. The deeper you go, the more you feel watched. Not by one thing, but by many. As if hundreds of eyes are peering at you from cracks in the walls, waiting to see if you belong there, or if you're just another visitor who won't make it out. And it's not only ghost hunters who speak of Lima's horrors. Former guards who worked there, even decades later, refuse to talk about what they saw. When pressed, some only mutter the same chilling words. That place was evil. Now picture yourself standing in one of Lima's long corridors. The air is damp. A single light flickers above. From behind you a sound, the clinking of keys, the shuffle of boots. You turn, expecting to see someone walking their rounds. The hall is empty. You start to walk faster, but then, out of the corner of your eye, you see two glowing red eyes staring at you from the dark. Would you run? Or would you freeze, knowing that in Lima, running may not save you? Because once Lima decides you belong to it, the walls close in, and there is no way out. If the thought of Lima chills your blood, hold tight, because Ohio has one more hospital that stands above them all, a place where tragedy piled upon tragedy, where spirits lash out in fury, and where even hardened investigators admit they left in fear. Our final stop is waiting, and it is the darkest of them all. You thought Lima was bad. You thought those long corridors and red eyes were the peak of Ohio's terror. But there is a place darker still. A place where cruelty and despair were not accidents. They were the very foundation of the building. Our final destination, the Ohio State Reformatory Infirmary and Asylum Wing. Mansfield. You probably know Mansfield as the prison from the Shawshank Redemption. Its castle-like exterior, its endless cell blocks, its rusting bars. But behind those prison walls, hidden from the public eye, was another nightmare entirely. The hospital and asylum wing where men didn't just lose their freedom, they lost their minds, and often their lives. The reformatory was built in the late 1800s. It was supposed to reform young offenders, teach them skills, and turn them into productive members of society. That was the dream. The reality was different. Disease swept through the cell blocks. Tuberculosis, pneumonia, influenza, all deadly in close quarters. The sick were dragged to the infirmary, lined up in beds so close you could hear your neighbor's dying breaths. And then there were those the prison deemed insane, men who cracked under the pressure of solitary confinement, men who screamed through the nights, clawing their own skin. They were shoved into the asylum wing, locked in narrow rooms where the silence itself was a torture. Some lasted weeks. Some lasted hours. None walked out whole. The morgue tells its own story. Bodies were wheeled down there daily, sometimes stacked in the cold, until someone had time to bury them. The staff kept it efficient, routine, mechanical. But the walls remember. Today, Mansfield's infirmary is one of the most paranormally active places in the entire prison, and it begins with the shadows. Visitors report figures pacing back and forth in the hallways, tall and thin. At first glance, they look like inmates. But when you focus, their legs don't move the right way. Some bend backward, others crawl along the ceiling. And then there are the ones that rush straight toward you, only to vanish an inch from your face. Investigators say you don't just see these shadows, you feel them. A pressure against your chest, like something is inside you, pushing down. Then there are the voices. Ghost hunters have recorded screams, whispers, even full sentences in Mansfield's hospital. One team caught a man's voice hissing, "Get out!" Another picked up sobbing, followed by faint hysterical laughter. But the worst was the night someone asked aloud, "Who's here with us?" The recorder answered in a guttural growl, "You." But the strangest reports come from the asylum cells. People who walk in describe overwhelming dread, like they've stepped into a space that wants to consume them. The air turns heavy, thick, almost unbreathable. Some hear fingernails scraping stone. Others hear the clang of a cell door slamming shut, though the cells are all rusted open. One former guard once admitted that even when he was alive, he hated that wing. You could hear them talking, he said, but not with their mouths, like it was in your head. The infirmary doesn't let you leave easily either. Many visitors have reported sudden disorientation, as if the hallways shift around them. They swear they've been walking in circles, returning again and again to the same broken gurney, the same flickering light. Some believe the building itself traps you, bending space to keep you wandering until it decides to let you out. And then, of course, there is the nurse in black. Legends say that during Mansfield's active years, some inmates swore a dark figure would appear at the foot of their bed in the infirmary. A woman in old-fashioned nurse's clothes, her face hidden by a veil. When she appeared, it meant you weren't getting better. It meant you were about to die. Decades after the prison closed, she's still seen. Paranormal teams describe entering a room and spotting her in the corner, motionless, silent. When they look away and glance back, she's moved closer, sometimes within inches. No sound, no footsteps, just closer. One investigator broke down sobbing after she appeared at the foot of his cot. He swore he felt her icy hand grip his ankle, holding him in place. And yet, for all of these stories, we're only scratching the surface of Mansfield's horrors. The morgue still waits, the tunnels still whisper, and the most violent entities have not yet revealed themselves. So take another breath, because we're only at the beginning of Mansfield's descent, and the deeper we go, the darker it gets. If the asylum cells made you uneasy, the morgue will make your stomach turn. The infirmary's morgue is still there, buried in the lower level of Mansfield. The metal drawers where bodies were stored, the rolling gurneys, the cold stone slab where countless men took their final breath. The room is rotting now, rust stains, peeling paint, broken tiles, but the air feels heavier than anywhere else in the prison. Visitors describe a choking smell of rot, even though nothing remains. Paranormal investigators often gag when they walk in, convinced the stench is real, and the activity here is relentless. One group of explorers tried to lay down on the slab, joking around. The moment one man closed his eyes, the temperature dropped. His friend said his chest rose and fell violently, as if he were struggling to breathe. He bolted upright, swearing something whispered directly in his ear. "Stay." Later, when they reviewed their audio recorder, a deep guttural growl bled through the static. Others say if you sit quietly on one of the gurneys, you'll feel pressure on your chest, like invisible hands are pinning you down. Some have even walked away with red finger marks on their skin. The morgue is not just haunted, it's predatory. But the infirmary above is no better. This was where the sickest inmates spent their last hours, lying in rows of iron beds under the weak glow of a single bulb. Death came slowly, painfully. Every inch of that place remembers it. Visitors often hear the rattling of coughs, labored wet breaths. Some claim they smell medicine, disinfectant, mixed with the coppery tang of blood. One woman fainted when she heard the sound of dozens of voices wheezing in unison, as if an entire ward of dying men surrounded her. And then, of course, there's the most infamous entity in Mansfield, the nurse in black. Her legend stretches back to the prison's darkest days. Inmates would whisper of her at night, a woman in old-fashioned nurse's garb, face hidden beneath a dark veil. They said if she stood at the foot of your bed, you were marked. You wouldn't be leaving the infirmary alive. Decades later, she's still here, and she is merciless. One team of ghost hunters reported walking through the ward when they saw her figure standing in the corner, perfectly still, perfectly silent. When they turned their cameras toward her, nothing showed up on film, but to their eyes, she was right there. They looked away for just a second, and when they looked back, she had moved. Closer, just a few feet away now, still watching, still waiting. The team leader froze when he felt something cold grip his ankle. He looked down, no one there. But the others swore they saw her at the foot of his cot, hand outstretched. He screamed, tore himself free, and refused to re-enter the infirmary again. And it's not just one-off encounters. She's been seen by dozens of people, described the same way each time, always in black, always silent, always closer every time you look away. But the nurse isn't the only one. Some investigators say she isn't even the most dangerous. The infirmary has something worse, an energy that doesn't act human at all. Teams have reported sudden violent scratches across their arms and backs. Some have captured EVP recordings that don't sound like words, but growls, snarls, almost animalistic. One man described it as being hunted in the dark by something you can't see, but you know it wants to tear you apart. And then there's the phenomenon of the death echoes. Late at night, if you walk through the infirmary halls, you may hear the sounds of an entire ward still alive, beds creaking, metal rattling, men coughing, groaning, crying, and then silence. Total silence, as if the room is holding its breath. And just as you begin to relax, the chorus returns, louder this time, right behind you. Some investigators refuse to enter after sunset. Those who do rarely last long. The infirmary doesn't just haunt you. It breaks you down, piece by piece, until you feel like you're one of the patients waiting for your own final breath. Now picture this. You're standing in the infirmary. Rusted bed frames line the walls. A faint buzzing hum comes from a broken light. You hear a cough in the corner, wet, ragged, and close. You shine your flashlight. Nothing. Then the bed next to you creaks. You hear the sound of sheets being pulled tight, as if someone invisible just lay down beside you. Your breath catches, and then, at the foot of the bed, you see her. The nurse in black, unmoving, waiting. Would you run, or would you freeze knowing that whatever she touches doesn't walk out alive? Because here in Mansfield, she isn't just watching. She's waiting for someone new. And if you think the infirmary is the worst it gets, you're wrong. Because below it all in the tunnels, something darker waits. And once you go down, you may never come back. The infirmary is terrifying enough. The nurse in black, the echoes of death, the suffocating weight of 1,000 final breaths. But if you want to face Mansfield's true darkness, you have to go deeper. Beneath the reformatory lies a network of basement tunnels, long narrow passageways that connect the hospital areas, morgue and solitary blocks. These tunnels were meant to be practical. Bodies could be moved discreetly. Sick inmates could be shuffled away without disrupting the rest of the prison. Guards could travel quickly between wings. But over the years, those tunnels became something else entirely. A graveyard for whispers, a labyrinth where the living and the dead walk side by side. Even before the prison closed, guards refused to patrol them alone. Stories spread of footsteps echoing in perfect rhythm behind them, but when they turned, the tunnels stretched empty. Some spoke of chains dragging along the floor, though no shackles were there. And then there was the breathing. Loud, guttural breathing, as if something huge was standing just behind you. One former guard admitted years later that he'd sprinted through those tunnels more than once, too afraid to look back. Today the tunnels are pitch black. The air is damp, heavy with mildew, and colder than the rest of the prison. Paranormal investigators describe walking for minutes before realizing they've lost all sense of direction. And that's when the activity begins. One group reported hearing whispers, dozens of them, all around. At first, it was impossible to make out the words. Then, slowly, the voices formed a phrase. "You're one of us now." Another team set up digital recorders. When they played them back, they didn't hear whispers. They heard screams. Dozens of screams layered on top of one another, echoing through the static. None of them had heard it in person. And then there's the entity some call the crawler. Multiple witnesses have described it. A figure low to the ground, pale and contorted, moving on all fours at unnatural speed. Its limbs bend the wrong way. Its head jerks sharply, as if broken. It scuttles out of the darkness, rushing right up to the edge of your light before disappearing. Some believe it's the spirit of an inmate driven insane, twisted by years of isolation. Others insist it isn't human at all. One investigator swore he saw its face. Sunken eyes, mouth stretched too wide, teeth bared in a silent scream. He dropped his equipment and ran. When he came back the next day to retrieve it, the recorder was still running. The last sound captured, a laugh, high-pitched, mocking. The tunnels are also home to the phantom prisoners, shadows that dart across the walls, forming the outline of men. Some appear chained together, shuffling in a line, as if still being marched to their cells. Others stand motionless, just watching. A few explorers claim they've been shoved hard by invisible hands. One man fell so violently he broke his wrist, though no one was near him. He swore he saw 3 figures standing over him in the dark, just silhouettes, before they dissolved. But the most terrifying stories are about the something else. Some investigators say the tunnels hold not just ghosts, but something darker. An energy that isn't human, that feeds on suffering. Equipment fails here more than anywhere else in the prison. Batteries drain in seconds. Cameras shut off without reason. Some say it doesn't want to be seen. And then there's the growl. Low, deep, not a human throat. Teams have recorded it, felt it reverberate in their bones. One man said it sounded like it came from inside his own chest, as if something was trying to crawl out of him. Others report seeing eyes, not red like Lima's shadow, not glowing, just reflective. Like an animal's eyes catching light in the dark. But when the flashlights swing toward them, there's nothing there, only the endless black. The tunnels are not a place you escape easily. More than one team has gotten lost, walking in circles, convinced the walls are shifting. Hours pass in the dark, and when they finally emerge, it's as if the building itself allowed them to leave. Now imagine this. You're standing in that tunnel. Your flashlight flickers. The air feels wrong, too heavy, too close. Behind you, the shuffle of footsteps. You turn, shining the light down the corridor. Nothing. Just brick and shadow. You start forward again. That's when you hear it. A scrape. Then another. Crawling. You whip the light toward the sound, and there it is. Low to the ground. Twisted limbs pulling its body closer, faster, faster. The beam hits its face, pale and hollow-eyed, mouth stretched open, and then the light dies. Darkness swallows you. The crawling grows louder, closer. You feel the breath on your ankle, and in that instant, you realize the tunnels never wanted you to leave. Some investigators swear they've carried the tunnels home with them. Nightmares of crawling figures dragging themselves across bedroom floors, waking to whispers in the corner of the room. One man even reported seeing handprints, wet, grimy handprints, appear on his bathroom mirror after returning from Mansfield. Because the tunnels don't just haunt you while you're inside them. They follow you. And if you think that's the worst Mansfield has to offer, you haven't heard about the chapel, where shadows don't just appear, they gather. And they don't just watch, they reach. We've seen the infirmary. We've braved the morgue. We've crawled through the tunnels where nightmares move in the dark. But there is one more place inside Mansfield. A place where even the bravest investigators hesitate. A place that doesn't just echo with death, it pulses with something darker. The chapel. In theory, this was meant to be a sanctuary, a space for reflection, prayer, redemption. Prisoners were brought here to find peace, but Mansfield's chapel never held peace. It held shadows. Step inside today, and the first thing you notice is the silence. Not quiet, silence. A thick, unnatural silence that presses against your ears. It's so absolute that when you finally hear something, your own breath, the shuffle of your shoe, it feels deafening. Then there are the shadows. At first, they seem like tricks of the light. Dark shapes sliding across the walls, moving just out of reach. But if you stay long enough, the shadows gather. Dozens of them crawling upward, pooling across the ceiling, then dripping back down in tendrils that stretch toward you. One group of investigators described it as watching the walls come alive. They swore the shadows moved together, almost intelligent, circling them like predators. Cameras picked up nothing, just blackness. But to their eyes, the room was filling with forms, growing thicker by the second. And then the voices began. Whispers, low and unintelligible at first. Then louder, overlapping, like a congregation chanting in some language no one recognized. One investigator clutched his ears, screaming that it was inside his head. The others grabbed him, dragged him out of the chapel, and the moment they crossed the threshold, silence. He collapsed, shaking, refusing to go back inside. But the chapel doesn't let everyone leave so easily. Visitors often report being touched, brushed shoulders, cold fingers on their necks. Some claim their clothes are tugged. One man said he felt hands shove him so violently he flew forward into a pew. When he looked behind him, no one was there. The worst are the ones who claim the shadows followed them home. Weeks after leaving, they see movement in the corners of their houses, hear whispers while trying to sleep, wake in the night to find their room darker than it should be, as if the shadows themselves seeped through the walls. And then there is the thing in the rafters. Many investigators describe looking up and seeing a darker mass hanging in the ceiling beams. Huge, formless, with glowing eyes staring down. It doesn't move. It doesn't need to. It simply watches. Some say it waits for the lights to go out. One team left the chapel after spotting it. They swore they heard heavy footsteps following them down the hall, then the slam of the chapel doors behind them, though no one touched them. The chapel is not alone either. The entire reformatory is filled with violent energy, scratches across skin, objects hurled through the air, growls captured on tape, people breaking down in tears, overwhelmed by something they can't explain. One investigator summed it up simply: Mansfield doesn't just haunt you, it breaks you. Now imagine this. You're standing in the chapel. The air is so thick it's hard to breathe. The flashlight in your hand feels useless against the dark pressing in from every side. The shadows start to stretch, crawling toward you. Whispers rise, faster, louder, until they're deafening. You look up, and there it is. The thing in the rafters, eyes glowing, fixed on you. You try to move, but your legs won't respond. Your chest feels heavy. The whispers rise into a roar. And then, darkness. Total, consuming darkness. When you open your eyes, you're back outside. Or at least you think you are. But something feels wrong. The silence follows you. And when you turn, just for a moment, you swear you see a shadow slip around the corner. Because Mansfield doesn't let go. Not really. And now our journey through Ohio's haunted hospitals comes to a close. We walked the halls of Athens, where Margaret Schilling's stain still marks the floor. We wandered St. Vincent's in Cleveland, where nurses and patients refused to rest. We stood in Riverside's empty wards, listening to the screams of children who never left. We faced the madness of Lima, with its red-eyed shadow and screaming corridors. And finally, we descended into Mansfield, Ohio's darkest labyrinth, where shadows gather, and where something beyond human waits in the dark. Of them all, one place stands above the rest. The ridges, in Athens, the permanent imprint of Margaret's body, the voices in the attic, the surgeon in the shadows. That asylum is not just haunted, it's cursed, and it may never be freed. But Mansfield runs a close second. Its energy is heavier, more violent, more dangerous. Some believe Mansfield doesn't just hold ghosts, it holds something much worse. Now I have to ask you, would you dare walk these halls at night? Would you survive the tunnels? Could you stand in the chapel while the shadows gathered? Or would you beg for the doors to open, praying Mansfield let you out alive? Tell me in the comments, if you had to choose one of Ohio's haunted hospitals to enter, which would it be? And don't relax just yet, because this is only the beginning. Next, we travel to Illinois, where the hospitals hold stories even darker, even more violent, and where investigators admit they fled in fear. You won't want to miss it. If you survive this journey, you belong here. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next haunting.